14th August, 2005. A strange and scary guest was hovering over the sky of Athens, the capital of Greece. A passenger plane was hovering over 10,000 meters above the ground without contacting anyone. The scary thing about this was that for the past 2 hours, this plane was not responding to any of the messages from the control tower. Fear had spread in the air and water of Athens. Was this a preparation for a terrorist attack or a hijacking event? Because of this fear, the Greek Air Force immediately sent its fighter jets behind it. When the fighter jets reached close to the plane, they saw a scene that blew their minds inside the plane. It turned out that there was absolute silence inside the plane. There was no movement, no movement. All the passengers were sitting lifeless on their seats, and no one was in the cockpit. Meanwhile, the pilots of the F-16 saw a man in the cockpit of the plane who apparently did not look like a pilot. He was hovering in the cockpit as if he was looking for something or trying to understand something. The next moment, the plane suddenly leaned to one side and quickly landed on the ground. A few minutes later, it collided with mountains in the north of Athens. In this incident, all 121 passengers and crew members were killed. But what was all this about? Why was there no movement inside the plane? Why were the pilots and crew members not responding to any of the calls? And what happened inside after takeoff that later became the reason for a horrific incident? This is the story of Helios Flight 522, which is also known as Ghost Plane. Welcome to Money Basics videos once again. On the morning of August 14, 2005, 115 passengers and 6 crew members boarded Helios Flight 522 at Larnaca Airport in Cyprus. Their destination was Prague, the city of the Czech Republic, but they had to make a stopover in Athens on the way. It was summer, and most of the people had gone out to celebrate the holidays from Cyprus, who were about to land in Athens. The captain of this flight was a very experienced person. At the age of 59, he had more than 17,000 flying hours of experience. The first officer was also 51 years old, and he also spent 7,500 hours in the air. Usually, in such incidents, the crew's expertise is emphasized, but in this case, the story was a little different. These 2 pilots were already together in many flights, and the first officer often complained to his friends and family about the pressure of the captain and his strict attitude. The airline was already aware of this issue. Not only this, but the training record of the first officer also showed that he had trouble with the checklist procedure. This was something that would later prove to be the most important. The plane was a 7-year-old Boeing 737-300. In the cold morning air, the plane took off from Larnaca Airport without any problem. As soon as the plane went above 10,000 feet, the crew contacted Nicosia Air Traffic Control and asked for permission to fly at an altitude of 34,000 feet, which they got. But as soon as the plane reached an altitude of 12,000 feet, a sudden alarm started ringing in the cockpit. This alarm was the same that often rang on the ground before takeoff, when there was a problem with the takeoff configuration of the aircraft. That's why both the pilots were surprised to hear it in the air. After 90 seconds, the captain contacted his airline's operations center and told them about the takeoff configuration warning.
He also said that the ventilation cooling fan lights were off, and asked where the circuit breakers were. The engineer on the ground replied that those lights should be off anyway, and those circuit breakers are behind the captain's seat. When the engineer asked the captain to confirm the problem, the captain said that they are not off. The engineer did not understand this answer of the pilot at all. Meanwhile, the engineer remembered one thing. Before the flight, this engineer had checked the pressurization system of the aircraft, because the controls of this system were close to those controls about which the captain was giving confusing answers. That's why the engineer asked the captain whether the pressurization mode is on auto or manual. But instead of answering this, the captain repeated the same question again. Where are the circuit breakers? During this conversation, the oxygen masks of the passengers inside the plane had fallen down. After a while, Helios ground operations lost contact with the plane. As soon as the plane reached 34,000 feet, all attempts to contact it were unsuccessful. Now Helios operations contacted Nicosia Air Traffic Control and asked them to try to contact Flight 522. For the next 5 minutes, the controller tried to contact the plane, but there was no response. Then the controller contacted another plane near Flight 522 and asked them to try to contact Flight 522. But this method also failed. Meanwhile, Flight 522 had now entered Greek airspace without permission, and it continued its flight plan. Nicosia Air Traffic Control also tried to contact Flight 522 on emergency frequency, but there was no response from here either. Then they contacted Athens ATC in Greece and asked whether they had contacted Flight 522 or not. But unfortunately, their radio calls also did not respond to the plane. Now there were two possibilities here. Either there was a problem with radio transmission in Flight 522, because of which they are able to hear the calls, but their answers are not being transmitted. Or both the pilots have been made hostage. Keeping the first possibility in mind, Athens ATC allowed the plane to land. But there was no sign of getting off from Flight 522. Despite contacting more than 20 times when there was no response, Athens ATC forcibly contacted the Greek Air Force and told them that Flight 522 has entered the airspace without permission and there is no response to the messages. The Greek Air Force immediately sent 2 F-16 jets to intercept. Until then, Flight 522 was perfectly following its flight path on autopilot. The point where it had to land had already been missed twice. But the plane was flying at 34,000 feet. At 7:37 a.m. in the morning, Flight 522 made a holding pattern at Athens Airport. Holding pattern is the pattern in which the plane is circling above the airport. And as soon as it gets permission, it makes a landing approach. When they were on the 6th round of the holding pattern, both the F-16s intercepted them. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, one of the 2 F-16 pilots gave a very surprising report. He said that the captain's seat is empty in the cockpit of Flight 522. He also looked inside the passenger cabin. In the light of the windows on the other side, he could see the cabin properly. There, the passengers were sitting on their seats completely motionless while they had oxygen masks on their faces. When the plane was doing the 10th round of the holding pattern, one of the F-16 pilots saw a strange scene. A man wearing a light blue shirt and a black vest entered the cockpit and sat on the captain's seat. He wore headphones and kept his hands on the panel in front of him.
The pilots pointed at the person in the cockpit, on whom he waved his hand and replied. But after a few moments, the left engine of the plane stopped, after which the plane quickly bent to the left and started descending towards the ground. A little before 9 in the morning, the plane turned more to the left, and after that, its right engine also stopped. After about 4 minutes, it collided with the mountains in the northwest of Athens and was destroyed. Immediately after the incident, the investigators started working. They examined the wreck and also questioned the engineer, who had done the maintenance work on the plane before the incident. One night before the incident, the same engineer had done a pressurization leak test on the plane. During this test, he removed the pressurization mode on the overhead panel from auto and put it in manual position. But after finishing the work, he forgot to put the switch back on auto. The plane was flying at an altitude of 34,000 feet, and due to the manual position, the air pressure inside it began to decrease. At low pressure, the human brain can work for only 10 minutes, and this condition is called hypoxia, meaning lack of oxygen. Its first effect is on the brain, which can cause confusion, lack of ability to think, and eventually unconsciousness or death. Both pilots had to check this switch in their pre-flight duties, but they did not pay attention, because normally that switch is in auto position. They had 2 more chances to identify the problem, before the taxi and after the takeoff, but they missed every opportunity. When the plane went above 12,000 feet, the cabin altitude warning alarm began to ring, but the pilot's attention went to the takeoff configuration warning instead of the pressurization system. In this misunderstanding, they started the procedure that is usually done on the runway before takeoff, and thus they completely ignored the real problem. During this time, oxygen masks came out of the plane, and the oxy-on light was on nearby. But due to the initial effects of hypoxia, perhaps they did not even pay attention to it. This was the time when the captain and the first officer fainted, and after the oxygen supply of 10 minutes was over, the passengers and the crew also lost their senses. Now the question arises, who was the person in the cockpit who reached there after 2 hours of their fainting? Investigations revealed that it was flight attendant Andreas Prodromou, who had a commercial pilot license, but he was not qualified to fly 737. From the cockpit voice recorder, it was found that Prodromou had also tried to make Mayday calls after the engines failed, but he forgot to press the transmit button by mistake. The investigation board investigated that his flying expertise was not enough to control a Boeing 737, even when the engine failed due to running out of fuel. And even if he had somehow landed the plane, it was impossible for the passengers and the crew to survive, because hypoxia causes irreversible damage to the brain for so long. During the investigation, 3 of the 4 portable oxygen cylinders found in the cockpit were in a used state. This proved that Prodromou and perhaps 2 other cabin crew members used these cylinders, which caused them to remain conscious for a long time compared to other passengers and crew. After the accident of Helios 522, the aviation industry learned a lot, and many new SOPs were also made, in which Boeing was instructed to increase pilot training and understand the difference between warnings. After implementing these SOPs, an accident like Helios 522 has never happened again. I hope you will like and share this video of Money Basics. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next video.